see forced marriage, as part of the spectrum of violent offenses, far more common. I mean, definitely more common than honor killing. And again, it's important to make a distinguish. Like, there's a big difference between forced marriage and arranged marriage. Your family helping you out find someone is welcome, actually, because it's hard out there, right? And it's as much as a gamble, your family finding someone as you finding someone on your own. But forced marriage is when there is no choice, and sometimes even both parties have no choice. Because it's a problem not only just because somebody's being forced into this major life decision, but also the consequences that we see in terms of domestic violence, in terms of mental health, in terms of even affecting the children that come out of it, or even sexual violence in the context of forced marriage. I mean, you're marrying someone you don't want to be with. There's obviously going to be sexual violence in that context. The impact is just traumatic. So we've seen cases like that in terms of our work at Ottawa Rape Crisis Centre, but the dynamics are so different sometimes. So in some cases, it's forced marriage in the sense of there's been a trespass. It's like, we knew you had a boyfriend, so now we're marrying you to someone that we choose in your family, and this is going to clean this situation. This is going to repair your reputation. So we've seen that. We've also seen dynamics where it's for bride price. So in certain communities, the family will receive money for marrying the daughter. So if a family is in need financially, they might decide to marry the daughters off as a way of getting income. So that's a forced situation because your family might have already taken the money before even consulting with you, and so you have no choice but to marry. And then we've also seen situations that are, particularly in the context of our work, quite disturbing, where there's actually been a case of either incest or sexual violence towards a young woman, and because she's lost virginity, and even though the family knows it was a case of sexual violence, the marriage is seen as a way of also repairing her reputation, because she's damn as good now. It's going to be hard for her to find someone on her own because she's no longer a virgin, because this trauma has happened, and so the best way to repair it is to marry her off. Without getting any counseling or any support for the fact that she's just, she's been a victim of sexual violence. So we've dealt with all of those scenarios in the context of our work. And again, it's been hard because in several of those situations, people love their families, and people have had to figure out how to negotiate around trying to maintain relationships with their families. And whether to accept the forced marriage or not. Because again, the dynamic of leaving isn't always, sometimes it's not an option. And you even have added issue of, say, if you're a citizen, we've dealt with people in a forced marriage situation who are not Canadian citizens. And that's a whole other kettle of fish, because the amount of protection we have for them is very limited. So that I would say is something we have much more familiarity with, is the forced marriage situation. It's far more common than people realize. And again, also how it happens. We've had situations where we were able to support the girl getting out of it. We have situations where, the young woman made a decision to go along with it. And, we've seen her afterwards, and it's, definitely the mental health repercussions of going in a situation like that can be quite long-standing. But again, they made choices. They had to weigh the options. And so that's also sometimes quite hard, but you also, when you walk with somebody through all of their options, and they're over the age of 18, they're adult, you realize it's not easy. It's to maintain those ties. Because another dynamic also that I should add to that is if you're marrying family. So for example, in many communities, you can marry your first cousin, you can marry your cousin. So there's another pressure as well to marry in a forced marriage situation, because that's bringing your family over here to work. That's helping your family immigrate. And they might be coming from a war-torn country. They might be coming from a lot of poverty. So your marriage to them is that ticket for the whole family to get out. So that's another huge pressure, where it becomes not a choice, because in many ways, it's like you're not just disappointing your family, you're disappointing your whole family. On both sides, because the other family is aside, and you're potentially relegating that whole other side of the family to poverty and violence. So there's just so much in terms of that I think we need to explore more as service providers in terms of how to support women both before and after, because there's also the after, right? So you can still be counseling a woman who has accepted a forced marriage situation. So there's the dynamics of the sexual balance aspect, because this is somebody you might not really like. It's there to negotiate this relationship. Because sometimes, I mean, we have situations where, people are with somebody who maybe isn't violent themselves, but this is not somebody they've chosen, and there's a lot of work to do. There's just the depression, suicide that might come, the children might be brought into the situation. There's a lot of mental health that comes after, and you might still have to support people through if they end up accepting a forced marriage situation because they felt that they couldn't get out.
Recently, I spoke with a good friend who is a part of a community in Toronto, and she was telling me how a lot of the women in her community were being forced into marriages, and when they rebutted against this, they were getting beaten. And I was truly shocked, and after reading about Violence Framed as Honor and helping out with the project, this was really my first one-on-one experience with someone that had witnessed it, and it really brought a lot of puzzle pieces together for me, and the things that I was reviewing and seeing, it made it more of a personal experience. Like, I gave a face to it, when so often you don't want to give it a face because you feel like, oh, you're like singling out a certain community or a single people group, but it was to have a personal experience from someone that it gave me much more like compassion and empathy, instead of just having something like, oh, this is something that I'm just researching and reading about. This is something that I can now relate to and think about from her perspective when I'm reading things.